Hello everyone and welcome to SketchUp for Landscape Design. This is the new user course that we are going to be releasing for free on the SketchUp for Landscape Design YouTube channel. I'm your host Adam and I'm a longtime SketchUp user. I've been using SketchUp since 2007 professionally in the landscape industry. I'm a longtime landscape professional who has owned my own design and build company. I've been the designer, the salesman, the estimator, the project manager, the foreman, the laborer. I understand the landscape industry inside and out, and I understand SketchUp inside and out as well. I want to take those two things and bring the learning of SketchUp to you in a way that is relatable and familiar and contextualize the information to something a landscape professional would understand. So please join me as we get started. We are going to break down in this lesson the navigation and axis in SketchUp. So let's jump over into SketchUp. And when we first open SketchUp, we're going to end up having something that looks like this. I am in SketchUp Pro 2021. So if you have an older version of SketchUp, that's fine. You can still follow along. If you don't yet have SketchUp, I would recommend getting SketchUp Pro. It is about $299 on subscription. If you can't yet afford that and want to get started and want to follow along, there is a free version of SketchUp out there called SketchUp Make. 2017, I believe, is the last year that they have that free version. And if you Google that, SketchUp 2017 Make, I'm sure you can find a download on the SketchUp site somewhere and download that for free. All right. So if you are in the newest version or in an older version and you open it, you should either have this character here or another character. These are put in SketchUp to give you a scaled reference of a human being. So as you can get in and start to quickly model and conceptualize something, you have that scale there that you're not necessarily having to do things 100% to scale as you're maybe massing things out or just playing with ideas. So 99% of the time, I just delete whatever that person is as I get started personally, because I don't generally use SketchUp as a conceptual tool to just sketch and play with ideas. It's more of a serious finishing tool where we're building things that are actually going to be built, and we're going to put real world scaled measurements to everything that we do. So I generally will delete the character the first thing I do. And then what we are going to do is open some new toolbars so that you guys can follow along. Okay, so let's just delete whatever the character is. Okay. And now we're going to go to View Toolbars. And you're going to see a lot of toolbars in my SketchUp that you won't have because this is the version of SketchUp that I use professionally every day in my business. So I use a lot of plugins. I don't want to have them all visible on the screen, so I have a lot of them turned off. But we're going to go down and look for the, I think it's under L. It's called the large tool set. So let's turn on the large tool set. And I think there's another one called the Getting Started tool set that you can turn off if you want, because they are going to be redundant. There's really nothing in the Getting Started toolbar that isn't in the large tool set as well. So you can just use one or the other, but you don't necessarily need to have them both on at the same time. So turn on the large tool set and then turn off the Getting Started. And then we're just going to turn on a couple other ones to start here. And one is the Views toolbar down here, VIEWS. And then we're going to turn on the Styles toolbar, which is right here. Okay. And we'll come back to this and turn on some more toolbars as we go. But for now, we're just going to start with these basics. Okay, so one thing you can note in SketchUp is that when you get your initial scene set up the way that you want it, you can also save that as a template so that when you open SketchUp, it gives you the option to open it just the way you want it every single time. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to Window, Default Tray, and let's turn on some of our trays here that we need. So we're going to need Entity Info. If you will probably have some of these on by default, but just make sure you have all of these on. So we need the Entity Info, Materials, Components, Styles, tags. If you have an older version of SketchUp, this will be called layers. So turn on your layers or your tags tray. Scenes, shadow, soften edges, and let's do instructor for now as well, because this will help you as kind of a reference. Okay, so I have mine shut off using a plugin over here. So let me turn on my trays and dialogues. All right. So the way that these work is we can collapse them like this. We can open them, close them, just open one at a time. When we're done with it, then we can close it. Generally, if we call a tool like the paint bucket, it will automatically open the thing that we need here. So we'll get into that later, but I called the paint bucket. It automatically opened the materials. So it doesn't work that way for the entity info. If we select something, it doesn't automatically open. So we want to open this. And this is really the first one that we need to familiarize ourselves with, is the entity info, because it's going to give us the information on whatever we have selected. It's going to tell us the definition of what that is, or what SketchUp sees that as, because it's not always obvious. It's going to give us some information about the material that's applied, the layer that it's on, either the length, the square footage, the volume. So different things that we select will give us different information in here that could be relevant to estimating. And then we have some other things that we can do that are specific to whatever we have selected. So an edge will have different dialogue here than a face, let's say. But we're going to talk about the difference of all of that in a second. So before we get into that, I want you guys to go to the Styles drop-down window here. Okay? We are in the, I think this one is called, okay, so here's the default style. This is the landscape architect style. And if you're not seeing these, you want to go to this drop down and go to default styles. Okay. The one that I personally work in is construction documentation style. So let's go there. And what that'll do is get rid of our horizon line. So we have no more sky and ground visible. Everything is white. It becomes more like a drafting tool in that sense. Now, if we wanted to turn that back on, we could use one of these default styles here, or we can go into styles and then go to edit. And under edit, we can edit the edge settings, the face settings, the background settings, the watermark settings, and the modeling settings. Okay, so we're going to go to background, and here's where we can turn on the sky and the ground. Okay, and then we could actually get in here and make these different colors if we wanted. We could do more of a blue and maybe more of a grassy green. Okay, so you can set it to show ground from below if you're underneath the ground. You can also adjust the transparency of the ground. But you can see the difference there. So that is our background settings. Our edge settings will basically define how our edges show up. You just want to kind of stick with the default stuff for now, but eventually we'll get in here and do things like turn on the endpoints. You can see that they showed up. This is the extension. So if we had a rectangle in here, kind of see, and then we could turn this up here, gave it a high enough number, it would actually add little extensions on the end of everything. We could make those bigger. So this is supposed to emulate a little bit more of the hand-drawn look. Like that. And then we can control the size here. Okay. So let me try to hide this. There we go. And then turn that off. Depth queue isn't really relevant until we get into 3D modeling. So endpoints just marks wherever there's a break in the line. So if I would even break the line there, it would add a marker to show where there's a break. Or if there was a break here, like that. And the other one is jitter. Jitter just kind of adds a little bit of irregularity in the line, so it looks a little bit more natural and hand drawn. Okay, so we can also change the color of the lines and then set it to by axis. So our green lines would show up green, and this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the axis. So we'll break this down and I'll help you guys understand why these are red and green. But let's just change it back to black for now. So then in our face styles, we have our face edit styles edit options. We have the ability to change. In SketchUp, there is 2 sides to every face, a front and a back. So we can adjust the front color and the back color separately. The default is this light blue. So if I look at this face, it's actually backwards because it's light blue. Okay. So I used to teach my students to turn the back face to red. So it was more of an instant indicator that it needed to be reversed. So there's an option, if you right click, you can reverse it. The reason for this is in SketchUp, it was originally something where you could have 2 different materials. So maybe on the outside of the wall, you had brick, but on the inside, it was painted or had wallpaper. So you could actually apply 2 different materials, one to the front and one to the back. However, now that rendering is as popular as it is and rendering has become a big thing, most render engines don't like when back faces are showing forward. Sometimes it'll render them invisible. So we always want to try to make a habit to always put our front color forward. So anytime we see the back face show up, we reverse it immediately like this. We would go in and reverse that. Okay, so let's just kind of put it back to that default light blue. Like that. So there's some styles here, and these are the same in the toolbar that we created or that we turned on. So all of these are the exact same. There's an X-ray mode. This will show back edges if we have something in 3D. So if I turn that on, I will actually see just the edges through it. So I could kind of snap to them. If I wanted to turn that on, it would be easier to find and snap to those back edges. There's wireframe that turns off all the faces. This is hidden line mode. Now in the edge settings, you can also turn off the edges altogether. So just like you can turn off all the faces with wireframe, you can go in here and turn off all the edges. So none of them show up. Okay. So if you did that and went to wireframe, oh, I guess it doesn't. You can't be in wireframe with the edges, without the edges being on. So the next one is hidden line. Hidden line shows you your edges. It turns all the faces white. But the cool thing with hidden line is it will show materials with transparency. So if I had let's say a glass material on here, like that. Okay, so you see that that is see-through. If we go to hidden line, you can still see through that. So everything becomes white, gets rid of all the materials, but it still shows transparency, which is a good thing about hidden line. Then we have the shaded mode, which basically if we have a texture on here, like one of these default brick materials, and we would apply that. And let me just make this a little bit smaller. Okay, so that's our regular texture mode. And if we go to shaded, it just basically averages that and makes it a solid color. So it gets rid of the actual, the texture image, and then we'll just go with the color instead. So if you want to be a little more nondescript when you're presenting something and don't want to bog the customer down with specifics on material choices just yet, and you're still focused on just the flow and the shape and all that stuff, then you can turn off textures with shaded mode. Shaded with textures is exactly what it says. This is the mode that you're going to work in most of the time. And then monochrome mode will basically show you if something is back or reversed or forward. Okay, so if I'm looking at this and both of these are textured, that looks like everything is fine. But if I go to monochrome mode, now I can see that the one face is forward and the other face is backwards. Okay, and you can kind of get that in the icon there. So then I can get in here and reverse this. Okay, so that's to kind of check things. Monochrome mode, unlike hidden line, does not respect transparency. So you can see the transparency went away in that window. So there's the difference. Hidden line doesn't show you if something's reversed though. So if I go here to monochrome, you can see the reverse face showed up, the transparency went away. If I go to hidden line, the transparency comes back, but the reversed face goes away. So just something to keep in mind, those little quirks and the differences of how things work. Okay, so that was in our edit face settings. Okay, so there's an option down here to turn on and off material transparency as well. So this will get rid of any transparency that was in the scene if we wanted to turn that off. That includes things that are like PNG images that actually have a transparent background, so they're cut out. For maybe people or leaves, things like that, we'll use transparency. You can turn that off there. And then you can also adjust the quality of the transparency for things like leaves and people, for plants in particular, with this here, and control the opacity as well of X-ray mode. As you get into X-ray mode, you can adjust that here. So you can kind of see that changing there. And that's only with X-ray mode on, and this set to faster. I think that comes on, or nicer. And then you can adjust this. All right, so that's just something to keep in mind. We looked at the background. You can add watermarks to your 3D scene, and it'll actually put the watermark right in your SketchUp window, and that way everything that you save out of SketchUp will automatically have that watermark. But there's other things that you can use watermarks for. Some people use them to um, as a way to add something like a style in a way, so you can almost give this paper effect that is this overlaid watermark. And if you go to different styles, they'll have watermarks on them. If you get into some of these other styles here. All right, so the last one is our modeling settings. So this is where we can do things like turn off the axis. So we turned off the model axis and we turned it back on. We could turn off hidden geometry, hidden objects, guides. This is for our section planes. And then there's some stuff in here that relates to photo matching, which is a whole other lesson we're not going to get into. The last button up here, the last window takes you to the mix. So the mix is basically something that we can actually add multiple things together. And let's go and so we want to make sure this is in a split window here. So I think it's this button that you have to push. But down here, we can actually go into some other edge styles. And if we wanted, because we're in mix, we can then pick something from here. So this would actually add, and we could drag this up to our edge settings. All right, so now we have the edge settings from this style only. And then we could go into default, and maybe we wanted the background settings from this one, so we could drag that up. Okay, so it kept the edges, but then gave us a different background. And we could go in here and maybe maybe this was our watermark settings. Okay, so there's their watermark. And then maybe this was our face settings. And then we could swap and interchange. There's a different watermark setting. So you can see how watermarks are used besides just for logos. So people use them to add different effects and things in SketchUp. All right, so that's kind of our styles menu in a nutshell. I'm going to go back to default settings and then click on construction documentation, which is where I want it to be. And then what you guys can do is go up to file and save as a template. And you can give it the name. Let's give it the name Clean Start. Okay, and then you just click in the description. You don't have to add one. It'll create a new file here. You can hit save. I already have one loaded, so I'm going to say no, but you would just say yes. And then when you start a new SketchUp, you'll see it as an option to start with your Clean Start default template. All right, so that is kind of setting things up. Delete this stuff here. And now we are all at a similar point. We have our viewport looking the same. We have our trays all in here. You guys will generally have your menu or your measurement button down in the bottom. I have mine magnified so you can see it easier. Okay. So this is specifically for the training. It's not the way it would show up for you guys. Let me make it a little bit bigger. There. You can kind of see the whole thing. That way, if I would, let's say, draw a line and type a measurement in, you guys can see that a lot easier. Okay. All right, so let's get started talking about navigation. So basically, there are some navigation tools here in our large tool set. So it's this block right here. And I'm just going to magnify the toolbar a little bit so you guys can see it better. There we go. All right, so this is in our large tool set. I'm just magnifying this section right here. And you can see that we have 6 different tools here that are our navigation tools. So if we would get in here and press on this is orbit. So basically orbit just rotates around. Pan obviously just pans back and forth, up and down. Zoom, if we would well, there's really nothing to zoom into, so let me just draw a quick box here. So now if I have something under the zoom magnifying glass, I can left click and drag and it'll zoom me toward it. So we would come back here, grab the pan tool, the orbit to rotate around, pan to slide over, orbit to rotate. Okay, and then zoom in and out. That's the longhand manual way. You could also select all, and this is zoom extents, which would bring it into the center of the screen. We can also use a zoom window to zoom in just by clicking and dragging. That'll zoom us into a corner. And then this will go back to our previous camera positions. Okay, so the first thing that I would recommend that you guys do as new users in SketchUp is let's go up here to Window. Let's go to Preferences. And we're going to set up a shortcut. So make sure you're on Shortcuts and then go to type in Zoom. And no, I think it's actually Camera Previous. So let's go Previous. Okay, there it is. So Camera Previous, go up here to Add Shortcut, click there. Okay, type Z, and then click the little plus sign next to it. Okay. It's going to ask you if you want to reassign it, say yes, and then it should say assigned Z. All right, so now what we can do is if we're moving around and we want to get back to our previous position, let's say we've moved out of the view by accident or something, then we just hit Z and we're right back to where we were. And we can cycle through the last, I think, 5 or 6 different camera positions with Z. So if we're trying to work really close and we actually get stuck in a wall or something, we just hit Z and get out very quickly. All right, so these are our these are our toolbar icons for navigation. However, we don't want to use these at all. They would take too long. It's not efficient enough to move around as much as we need to move in and out of our SketchUp model and fly all over the place. Those icons would basically slow us down. So here's the way that you need to think about moving in SketchUp. One hand on the mouse all the time, and basically one hand on the middle mouse button all the time. Okay, so keep your finger on the middle mouse button, either your middle finger or your index finger. I use the index finger, and then scroll wheel to move in and out, middle mouse down to rotate, middle mouse down, and shift to pan. Okay, so you're going to do shift with your pinky on, if you're right-handed, your pinky on your left hand is shift, index finger, middle mouse. So you rotate, shift, pick up the mouse, rotate some more, shift. So the way that I work and recommend that you work is to always try to keep what you're doing in the middle of the screen. So, if what you're working on is up here, you want to bring that down into the middle so that you can work on it. Um, One other thing with SketchUp that's important to remember is that it zooms in to where the cursor is. So it doesn't matter what tool you have, the scroll wheel will always zoom. Okay, but if I put let's hit spacebar and go make sure we're on the select tool. Okay, spacebar is the default shortcut for select. And select is our main tool that we're going to use to just select different things, whether it's an edge, a face and the edge, or everything. So 1 click, 2 clicks, 3 clicks. So we're in the select tool, and let's put the select tool up into, let's say, this corner. Okay. So see, when I scroll in, I'm going right to that corner. So even if I go up here now, it's going to scroll me in over there. It's not going to center it, but it's going to scroll over where I am. So for me to center it, middle mouse, shift, pull it down. Okay. If I wanted to work on the back side of this, it would be rotate. And now I'm starting to get way over here. So I'd come back, rotate again from this point, let go, come back, rotate again from this point, let go, come back, rotate again from this point. Now, I realize if you guys are brand new to SketchUp, even drawing this box might have been confusing. So let me just walk you through that quick so you have something to help navigate through. Okay, so we're going to, with the large tool set, we're going to go down here to rectangle, and we're going to click in here, just position your screen so that our axis is right in the center. And then we're going to click, we're going to hover over the very 3-point intersection between these lines, our axis, right? So we have green, red, and blue. We're just going to hover until we get this thing that says origin, and then left click, drag this out, and look for that diagonal line to show up. That means we have a square. And this might look square, but if we rotate up, and we do that by holding the middle mouse shift to move down, and then let go of shift and then rotate up. Come back and grab it again, middle mouse shift, rotate down, let go of shift, and then rotate up. Okay, so now we can kind of see that showing up when we're square. Let's just click there. Then we're going to rotate back around with middle mouse button. And then we're going to go grab this tool over here called push pull. So then we can click that and lift up. Now we have a box, okay? So this gives us something that we can rotate around. So let's come in close to our box and let's start to rotate around it in a, what would that be? Counterclockwise, I guess, position. So here's what you're going to do. All right, the box is there. Why don't we do this? Why don't we select the box, select everything, and you can just drag a window like this from left to right or triple click on the box. But let's just drag a window. And then we're going to click on this button over here, zoom extents, and that'll put it right in the middle. All right. So now we're going to rotate around. And what I want you to do is come to this edge of the box, put your middle mouse button down, and that's going to bring up the rotate orbit symbol, and then just drag to the left to about there, then let go. Now come back to this point. So imagine what you're doing is where you're grabbing onto it is you're essentially grabbing the viewport and you're rotating it, and you're grabbing it from a spot and you're turning it around. So imagine the window was like is that a diorama? Is that what they call those? But imagine that was something that was actually, you could actually turn what was inside of it. You would come and grab it, and then you would turn it, grab it, turn it. So you would do this multiple times, right? You're going to pick up the mouse, come grab it again, go over, pick up the mouse, come grab it again. So let's just do that a couple times. Let's grab it, let go, grab it, let go, grab it, let go. Now, if you grab it out here, you're going to get a little bit more turn radius as well, depending on how wide your monitor is, whatever. So you could also grab it and rotate it down. You don't actually need to grab what you're rotating. You can grab anywhere on this screen. Okay. And the one thing with SketchUp navigation that is really important to remember is that it works mid-operation. So let's go back here and grab our line tool. Okay, so let's click that. And I want you guys to click on this top endpoint like this and let go. Just one right click. Okay, now you can see that line is there. Now do the middle mouse button and you can see that it's brought up our orbit. And now let's rotate around like this so we can actually see that corner and then let go. Now we're still there with our line tool. Okay, so let's rotate again. It's about here. And now let's hold shift without letting go of the middle mouse and bring it back over. Let go of shift, rotate around, shift again, bring it down. So we can actually position this exactly where we want it. We could let go of the middle mouse, come up here and rotate around again and just kind of put it in the center, or if we wanted to put it like this, or if we wanted to put it like this, whatever we would need to be drawing. If we were going to detail this, put an overhang, a gutter, anything, we might want to get pretty close and then draw from there. So another thing with SketchUp is you're going to see this happen a lot. Okay, it's nothing to be freaked out about. It happens. It's supposed to happen. It's called clipping. Okay, so if you get too close to it, the 3D window is actually cutting across the geometry. So if you really need to get close to something and you're clipping like that, there's a couple ways to get rid of that. One is to change your focal length in your camera. So we would go camera, field of view, and then we would change it and lower it. So if we go down to maybe, now we could actually zoom in closer and look, it's not happening. But as we pull that field of view bigger, you can see that right around 35, it starts to split the geometry. So if you do have that issue, just turn down your field of view temporarily and then turn it back up. Or generally I work around 50. What you can do is, if you're getting that happening, you can also go camera parallel projection, and that's actually a field of view of 0 basically. But then we could zoom way in. You're still going to get it a little bit. If you rotate around, you can kind of get rid of it. So there's only so close you can get sometimes. So if you're having problems, what my recommendation is, and this is getting ahead of ourselves, but I always scale. If something is so small that I'm trying to add detail to that, you know, this is a small little cube and it's only 1 foot, it's only 2 feet wide, and I'm trying to zoom way in to something, and I'm going to eventually start clipping that. So to avoid that, I could also scale this up 10 times. So I would grab it, go to the scale tool, click a corner, scale it up, type 10, enter. And now I can get a lot closer because this is actually bigger. So just another tip there. All right. So we saw how the navigation works in the middle of an operation. So let's just practice here. And now we're going to do one other thing. I want you guys to triple click and then right click, go to reverse faces. And now I want you to come here and try to get inside the cube. Watch what happens. So zoom in and look. It seems like you're not going to get through because you're zooming forever, and then suddenly you break through. Why is that? The thing with SketchUp navigation is that there is a distance value that's applied. So if the geometry that's under my cursor is further away, I'm going to, each click of my scroll wheel forward as I zoom is going to be relative to the distance of what's under the cursor. So if I'm trying to zoom into something a mile away, I don't have to zoom for an hour to get to it. I don't have to scroll over and over and over. So it'll basically recognize that that thing is way in the distance, and it'll make each scroll, each click of the scroll wheel, a greater distance, right? But if it's something that's very close, it's going to bring down the distance. So as I get close to the wall, each one of my scrolls is now turning from probably what was yards to feet to inches to millimeters, you know, and it's getting smaller and smaller. So it takes a bit before we actually break through the wall. Okay, so we're in the wall though, we're inside the cube. And now I just want you to kind of rotate around and practice this without getting stuck or without going through the wall like that. Okay. And actually, why don't we go back into our styles, go to edit, face style, and let's turn the back color red just so we can see it right away. Let's just do like a bright red like that. So then if we break through, it's like instant red. Okay. And then practice. Okay. So this is a pretty big square, but I'm going to rotate around our cube like this. And I'm rotating, and then I'm clicking shift and I'm pulling it back to the center. Okay. Rotating, clicking shift, pulling it back to the center. Okay. All right. So we're doing that pretty successfully. Okay. So now let's scale it back down. So I'm going to do 10, oops, minus 10 like this. Or no, I don't. I want to do 1. Or do I want to do 0.1? There we go. Sorry. All right. So now we're 10 times smaller. So now let's get inside, and it's going to be a little bit harder to rotate around without going through the wall like that. So just keep practicing. And it's middle mouse shift, middle mouse shift, middle mouse shift, middle, whoops, right? So try not to break through that wall. Okay, so this is just for reference if you guys needed to make your own cube. This is, again, about 2 by 2, 1 foot 10. All right, so then you could actually go down smaller. We could make another cube that was 1 foot by 1 foot. And then pull it up 1 foot. Let's reverse the faces, get inside, and now try to rotate around this without going through. So good, it's a good exercise. Okay, so then you could also, you know, put your cube here way in the distance. And I'm just using the move tool, see it getting smaller. All right, so here, let's look at the difference. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're that close, okay? So let's put it on this one that is, let's measure 123 feet away. And now let's see how many scrolls it takes if we hover over it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8, and we're at the same. So you can see what's happening. It's actually scrolling faster because it's further away. Okay. Now, the other keyboard shortcut we can make is to go back up to Windows. Let's go to Preferences. Let's go Zoom Extents. Okay. And I want you guys to set it to Shift Z. I have it set to zoom selection, but let's just do zoom extents and say yes. Okay. Now we can grab that box up there and do Shift Z. Rotate around. Rotate around. Where's the other one? There it is. Okay, find our other box, select it, Shift Z. Grab that one. So I should have actually set that up to zoom selected. That's why I had it that way. Zoom extents is just basically centering the model. So there's another option for zoom selected. Let's go Windows, Preferences, and I do these things so many times, they just become second nature, and I sometimes forget what exactly things are called. So zoom selection, that's the one we want. So Shift Z. Okay. Now that will zoom us to the selection that we have, like that. So even if it's just an edge, it'll zoom us to that edge and put it in the center. So if it's that face, it'll put it right in the center of the screen. So that's why zoom selection's a little bit better, but there we go. All right, so you guys can keep practicing that. Scrolling in and out, middle mouse button, and Shift. Okay. Zoom in, rotate around, like that. Shift, middle mouse, rotate. Now we can zoom to this one. Rotate around and do a little path if you, a little like course, and make one if you want to practice. All right. Now, if we are in a 2D drawing space, I always recommend that you're in top view. So you go to camera, standard views, top, and then go camera, parallel projection. So this is a true top view. And you can tell because the blue axis disappeared. So if we go back to perspective, you can see the blue came back. Go back to parallel projection and the blue went away. Okay. So if we're in a top view true 2D, which is what this is, then we don't want to use the scroll wheel at all. We only want to use the scroll wheel and shift together and just move like this. Or when you're in top view parallel projection, sometimes it's just as easy to zoom out a little bit and then just put your cursor. If I was working on something over here and I wanted to get over here, instead of shift and middle mouse to move over, I could also just zoom out, put my cursor here and zoom in. Zoom out, put my cursor here and zoom in. So that's another way to kind of get around pretty quickly. Okay. And if you accidentally rotate, then we can just hit Z to get us right back where we were. Okay. So this is for 2D drawing in SketchUp. I'm not going to get into that right now, but if you ever do that or take my course where we talk about 2D drawing, that's how you navigate around there. So we could now go back to camera perspective. Okay. So again, this is just changing our field of view. And we'll get more into the camera in another video, but I just wanted to do enough that we could actually work on the navigation and understand a few things. Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the axis in SketchUp. All right. So what is this axis? What is this green, red, and blue? So let's do what we did before. Let's go back into Edit Edges and turn the color to by axis. Okay. And I'm going to take all of these, right click on a box here and go reverse. Okay. Now And let's just go to edge mode, actually. Okay. So you got to be careful with edge mode, because when I go to rotate now, it's really harder. It's harder to rotate because there's nothing to actually grab onto. And when you have a face here, you can actually rotate and click on that face and it recognizes it. But when you hide the faces, and now I do the same thing, sometimes it, it'll rotate in a weird way like that. But that's getting away. Let's talk about the axis. So essentially, if you have something in hardscape terms, like let's say you have a wall and a wall cap, and maybe there's a pillar on the end of that wall, like let's say a sitting wall, which we make a lot in outdoor living spaces. Let me actually find a picture of one here. All right, so let's just look at a few of these here. So here's one, and you can see that this wall is turning 90-degree turns as it comes in, and then we have a pillar cap. So if we would think about it, or even this wall, this is one axis, the pillar cap coming this way, and that bit of wall block there is another axis, and then the other axis is vertical. Okay, same here. This is one axis, and you can see that this patio has some strong, crazy slope on it, but you can see that the joint line, right, the bond line, the linear run of this line here is straight and parallel, right? Or it's perpendicular exactly to the lines that are running this way, or it's 100% parallel to the lines running this way, right? That's how you know you have a good hardscape, if things are parallel and perpendicular from the house, or as we always called it, just square. So things are square to the house, square to itself. The whole patio is square. The walls are square. Everything is square unless it's a curve. And then it's, a true radius, right? So with SketchUp, it's the same thing. We're trying to always make sure that we're checking square. We want everything that we draw in SketchUp to be square to itself, square to the house. The steps are square to the house, or to the door. The wall here is square to the steps. Maybe that's square to the driveway. However we've designed this, things being square is super important. These things like these inlays, or and if it's not square, then it's a specific angle from square. So we're always thinking in that term. That's why we pull out string lines. That's why we do so many layout markings when we're actually doing construction. So in SketchUp, when we have these axis lines which give us the indicators of us being square. Okay, so you have basically your model axis, which is the world axis. It's square in the model itself, and that's this set of axis lines here. These don't show up in anything. They don't show up in your renders. They don't show up when you export a SketchUp screenshot or anything like that. They're strictly there to help us as modeling tools. So if we grab our line tool and we start to draw, and let's actually not snap at the center. Let's come out here in an open space so we can see better. Okay, so as we start to draw, we can see that we're getting a green line. Okay, and then over here on the box, you see we have a green line. There's a reason that this green line and this green line are going in the same direction, because it's a universal indicator that things are square in that direction. So whether it was east to west, or north to south, or west to east, or whatever, east, west, north, south, and then up, down is how you would want to think about it. So all the lines that are running in this way, so say this is west to east if we were facing in this direction, right? So let's say this is west to east. all the lines that are running east and west or west to east are going to be green. No matter where we draw them, they're always going to be green. Okay, and this is what we want. We don't ever want to draw, if we're drawing a patio or a house or anything, for an edge to be like that. Okay, because if it's black like that when we're drawing it, that means it's off axis. That means it's out of square, out of plumb. It's no longer going to give us true 90s as we go about drawing. All right, so the same goes in the other direction. So anything that would be coming, let's say, north-south, right? It's a little bit tricky here because you look at that and you're like, that's a diagonal line. Why is that turning red? Well, it's because we're in perspective view. And if I would draw it on this side, you'll see it's going to be the opposite angle. Okay? Because what's happening is actually these are both going to a vanishing point like that. So that's what perspective drawing is all about, right? If we would come back here to that field of view and we would lower it, these are going to actually become more, they still have a vanishing point unless we would get to 0, and then there's no vanishing point. But you can see how now they're not angled anymore. But as we raise this up, watch how they start to angle. Okay. And then again, camera parallel projection, there's no vanishing point. It's a field of view of 0. So we can't rotate down and see where this disappears in the distance because now they're truly parallel from each other. All right, so let's go back to perspective. Again, I work around 60, 50 to 70, somewhere in there. But, all right, so, you know, it may look from this angle that things are not square because they look like they're diagonal, but it's an optical illusion of when things are in perspective. All right, so it also helps you when, you know, maybe you're drawing out on the green and then you want to draw on the red and you're like, wait a second, where is it? That's when that comes in handy because now you can use that. Or if you're looking at the red here and you're like, oh, I got to be parallel to that. No, you have to actually meet that as the vanishing point. So you keep moving it and then you'll see it turn red. Okay, so there's an easier way to do that. We're going to use the arrow tool, the arrow keys, to lock us to the axis. So if I click here and I wanted to be in the red and I was having trouble finding it, very simple. I click the right arrow and boom, locks me right on the red. Okay, so if I was coming this way and I was having trouble finding green, click on the left arrow, boom, locked on the green. Okay, so we can do that very, very, very easily from any perspective we want. You know, if we're here and we're trying to find it, boom, red, boom, green. Okay, so you can go through and always use red and green if you want. So the red is going to be parallel to the red axis here, but it's also always going to be perpendicular to the green axis, which means wherever they intersect will be a true 90-degree curve. And we can check that by going to Tools, Protractor, clicking where they intersect, and either coming this way or this way. We can go on the red, click once, and then come up, and you can see the angle is true 90 degrees. All right. So what about the blue axis? Well, that in our arrow locking, that's the up arrow. So if I was drawing an edge here and I wanted it to be up, I could just tap the up arrow, and now I'm locked on the blue. And that looks weird because of the perspective, but if we would rotate around, you can see that that is indeed truly up on the blue axis, parallel to the world's blue axis, right? but it's also 90 degrees this way. So if our red came across and over like this is also now 90 degrees because this is going to be perpendicular. So again, if we went to the protractor and rotated that around so it's on the red, click there, come up, and you can see true 90 between there to there. All right, so now using those indicators to draw means that everything we draw is going to be square and spot on. Obviously, not everything's square. There are arcs and curves, but if we make every straight run square, life is going to be so much easier. Our faces are going to close as they should, and just everything will work better in general in SketchUp. You're going to run into less headaches. So, you will run into situations where maybe you have a house that most of the walls are square, and then there's a wall that's on a 45. That happens. It's where you can come in with the protractor. You can lay out some guidelines at 45 degrees. Now you can change the axis. Okay, so you can go into Tools, come in here to Axis, and I could actually change this if I would click here and then drag it down on this 45, click again. Okay. And we're trying to set, it tells us down here that we're trying to set the green axis, right? So if this was the red, then the green would be 90 degrees from this edge like that, right? So you can kind of see that the green snapped there. So we'd click again and boom, there's our axis now. So now everything that we would draw here is according to the new axis, right? So and again, if we went to parallel projection, you can see that these are indeed square. Okay, but if we look at those in comparison to what we've already drawn, and you notice how these have all gone back to black because we are set up here to mark by the axis. So now these all appear to be off axis, even though they were set to our original axis that we had. But now these are on axis, so they're turning the color indicators. So you can always turn this on as a way to help you in drawing. You don't typically want to change the axis like I just did unless you have a huge part of the house that's off axis. You can change it, helps you model, helps you draw things out, gives you new indicators, and then you can put it back like this. So we can go back to Tools, go back to Axis, and then if I would go back to somewhere like this, and now we've set it up, and you saw all of those edges now changed back to on axis colors. Okay, so one thing with the axis is that I'll get into it in another video on like groups and components and stuff, but this is the world axis, but there's also a secondary axis to consider when you get inside of a group or a component, which you guys aren't going to really know what those are yet if you're a brand new user with no SketchUp experience. But let me get out of X-ray mode. Okay, but if I would get in here and make this into a group, now when I get inside of the group, I have my own axis inside of the group. Okay, so even if this was rotated, okay, the regular axis is out here and is like this. But then if I get inside here, you can see that my axis is completely different because it's a local axis versus a global axis. So the one inside of your group and component is going to be different. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind with the axis and how that works. So it's important. We have to kind of always rely on it as our drawing aid and really look for those indicators. Again, go into styles, change your color by axis if you want some help in the beginning to make sure that you stay on axis, but always stay on axis. So the homework, if you will, after this course lesson is to go practice your navigation. Do what I showed, maybe set up some boxes, start big, work your way down, try to rotate around inside, try to not pop out. You can set that back color to red so you can see better if you do pop out, and keep doing it until you get better and better and better, and to the point that you're rotating inside that box flawlessly. So get your rotation or get your navigation down and just practice it constantly. And then go in and practice just drawing out some edges with your bi-axis color turned on, and just, kind of get familiar with it. Look for the indicators, look for the red, look for the green, and, maybe just try to practice drawing out. See, because it's really tricky. I'm here in this perspective and I look like I just drew an edge and it snapped to something, but you don't realize from this viewpoint that you just made a line that was down into the ground. It doesn't look like it because it's an optical illusion. So you have to rely on not only the indicators that you get here, but also the arrow keys. So use your arrow keys, lock in each direction, and it'll really help you to make sure that you stay on axis. All right, so go practice that. Maybe draw out a couple footprints to houses, play with some patio shapes, whatever you want to do in terms of landscaping to practice this. Just make sure that what you're doing is square. It's super, super, super important. All right, so in the next lesson, we are going to start talking a little bit more about the drawing tools, okay? And then we'll get into the editing tools after that. But we're just going to break down the fundamentals over maybe 6 to 10 different lessons here for new users. All right, so if you guys have any questions, leave them below. You can also find the SketchUp Facebook group called Landscape SketchUp, where if you're a landscaper who's a professional landscape contractor, designer, architect, and you are a landscape professional and you're in North America, so the US or Canada, then you can put a request in there, and you can also ask questions there. It's a very limited and very specific group to that demographic. So if you're not in the US or Canada and you're not a landscape contractor, then you'll not get in the group. So just to give you a fair warning, but it's Landscape SketchUp. If you wanted to hit us up on Facebook there, it's a group of other like-minded landscape professionals using SketchUp. All right, so I hope that you guys enjoyed that video, and I hope the course overall is beneficial. And as you guys start to get more comfortable in SketchUp, I will start to introduce more and more things that will show you how to adapt SketchUp into landscaping. I also have a training course that will be available in June. That's going to be all of the ins and outs of how to do landscape design in SketchUp. It's actually going on live right now. It's a 10-week course. So we're underway. Registration's closed, but once it's over at the beginning of May, and then I'm going to release all of that, a better edit of it in June. I am available for private tutoring. If you do need help privately, you can sign up for that on sketchupforlandscapedesign.com. All right. So, or just leave me a message if you have a simple question. I'd be happy to help you guys. So that's all for now, and I will see you in the next video. I hope you guys all have an amazing day. Bye now.